Whether you or a coach are putting together your training program, these are just general steps to consider so your time and money are well spent. These 4 steps would apply to both athlete, non-athlete, looking to construct a well-structured training program. First is a needs analysis. This would identify your current sport, the physical fitness, training background, and experience along with past injuries you may have had. This will help you begin to classify your training status as beginner, intermediate, or advanced. As a beginner, you may have less than 2 months of training experience, and it's recommended you start with 1 to 2 times per week with minimal to no training stress. If you classify as intermediate status, you may have 2 to 6 months of moderate resistance training experience, and it's recommended that you train 2 to 3 times per week with medium training stress. You're considered advanced and a veteran if you've had 1 or more years of resistance training under your belt. It's recommended you train 3 to 4 times or more per week with a high training stress. The sub-step under the needs analysis is to perform some physical tests and evaluate. The purpose of this is to identify where you line up physically and really to ensure your ego doesn't cloud reality. For athletes and non-athletes, these could be a number of tests. You could do barbell squats to air squats, bench press, push-ups, shoulder press, power cleans, leg press, and so on. After or even before those physical tests have been done, this is a great place to identify your training goal. This is where people begin to overwhelm themselves by trying to achieve way too much. For athletes, I recommend focusing on 1 goal per season, if it's off season, preseason, in season, or postseason. As for non-athletes, the focus is done in 3 or so month increments. This purposely keeps things simple by focusing on 1 goal and should provide enough time to achieve that goal. So in step 1, identify your training status, whether beginner, intermediate, or advanced. From there, you'll perform various tests and evaluate, then identify 1 goal or training outcome per season for athletes and the non-athletes for about every 3 months or so. Step 2, we dive a little bit deeper into training frequency and the type of split routine. I mentioned earlier about training status, if you are a beginner, intermediate, or you're advanced. So for non-athletes, it's best to follow my previous recommendation. As for athletes, this is determined by your sport and the season. For off-season, the frequency per week recommended is around 4 to 6 training sessions. For preseason, 3 to 4, in season 1 to 3, and postseason 0 to 3 sessions. These are just general recommendations and should also consider overall physical stress of training, recovery time between training, and the athlete's sport, of course, and other physically demanding tasks like work, if that's relevant to the athlete. There are a number of split routines athletes and non-athletes can follow. All I recommend is that you find one that you like and stick with it for the duration of your training plan before trying something new. This will be sure you've had sufficient time to get in a rhythm and measure for results. Some examples of various training splits might be upper body, lower body. This honestly could be done twice a week for someone newer to training, or even 4 times a week for someone with more experience, allowing for sufficient rest throughout the week. And then you've got push-pull legs. This could be done 3 days a week. Push consists of your pushing muscles, such as your chest and then your triceps, and then pull is your pulling muscles, such as your back and then your biceps. And then of course, legs. You can even switch up the order and do something like a push, legs, and pull. This could potentially work in 5 training sessions in a week and gives your muscles sufficient time to recover between the different muscle groups. There are just a few combinations, and they can be altered based on the needs of the athlete or non-athlete. So in step 2, you'll identify your training frequency per week and the type of training split. This will be something you will want to stick with for the full duration of the season or 3-month period. Step 3 is identifying the exercises. This part can be super overwhelming and difficult given that there are hundreds of resistant exercises to choose from. When choosing exercises, it's important to identify between core or multi-joint, and not to be confused with your core here. And then there are assistance or single joint exercises. Core exercises include movements that recruit one or more large muscle areas and involve two or more primary joints. For example, you've got chest, shoulders, hips, and back. As for single joint exercises, these recruit smaller muscle areas. For example, arms, abs, and calves. Generally speaking, for athletes and non-athletes, I recommend core or multi-joint exercises, then assistant or single joint exercises. Some of the multi-joint movements to consider are bench press, bent over barbell row, shoulder press, deadlift, squats, and so on. And if you're an athlete focusing on power movements, you may even want to do those before your multi-joint exercises. Again, in this step, you'll want to identify multi-joint exercises. A common mistake is exercise choices adding in too many single joint, and then you're switching it up too frequently. I've been doing many of the same barbell movement or multi-joint exercises since I started training all the way back to junior high. Step 4. This focuses on training programs with number of reps, sets, and rest. Depending on your goals, there is a progressive overloading that has to occur over time to allow your body to adapt. This progressive overloading is important to avoid injury. A typical training program might be described as either muscular endurance, hypertrophy, and then strength, of course. Generally speaking, for those newer to resistance training and athletes looking to improve their endurance, they're likely to begin with, of course, an obvious muscular endurance program. The rep range is over 12 reps with a lighter load and then fewer sets. The recommended rest is anywhere between 30 seconds to a minute. For those looking to improve their muscle size, a hypertrophy training program is ideal. The rep range is from 6 to 12 reps, and it's commonly recommended 3 to 6 sets. As for rest, between the sets, that can be anywhere from 30 seconds to 2 minutes. And then finally, strength training. This happens to be my favorite. I believe every non-athlete, athlete, male, female, kid, or adult should eventually progress towards it. Strength training does not make you bulky, as misinterpreted by most females. Strength training does not stunt your child's growth. For those seeking to become more athletic or tone, strength training combined with a sound diet will yield those results. The typical rep range for strength training is 1 to 6 reps with 2 to 6 sets and anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes of rest. As for athletes looking to specifically improve their speed, agility, and power, these are typically baked in with a sound training program and are specific to the needs, goals, and sport of that athlete. In this step, you'll identify your training program, whether that's muscular endurance, hypertrophy, or strength. Each program will have its own number of reps, sets, and rest, plus it will depend on the experience and goal of the individual. These 4 steps will give you a rough foundation to constructing a well-structured training plan. After your training plan has been put into place, the most challenging part is consistency and adherence to that plan. As mentioned earlier, people tend to switch up their program too frequently or they avoid the hard barbell movements. Create the plan, stick with it, then reevaluate and adjust accordingly. Thanks for joining. If you have any questions or are needing help putting together your own training program, feel free to reach out to support@abftribe.com.